Good morning. This video will walk you through Isadore's online testing process. To begin, you'll go into the course where you'll be administering the online assessment, go into the Test and Quizzes tool. Here you'll see all of the assignments that you've already created. You'll either have a draft or a published copy. The draft is considered the original document, so if you make any changes or setting updates, you'll want to make it to the draft rather than a published copy. So taking a look at the settings for an online assessment, and to reach that, you'll go into the Actions button next to the draft, click on Settings. In the next menu, you'll have the option for the About screen, where you can put the title, any special instructions the students might have, or any attachments they might need. The next screen is where you'll set up the availability and submissions. This will be the general testing timeframe for the class. So you can select to release the online assessment to the entire site, to users, or to specific groups. Usually you'll leave this set to the entire site. You can decide if students will have unlimited submissions or a specific number. Usually it's set to 1 by default. You'll select an open date and time, a closing date and time. You can enable a timer, and then you can allow the submission of late work to a certain time if you wish. Any assessment that's submitted after the close date but before the late submission date will be flagged as a late submission. So you can either choose to accept it or not accept it, or deduct points accordingly. Exception screen is where you would add an exception for a user who's been granted additional time by the OLR. You can either select a student's name from the list for a specific user, or if there's a group that you've configured, you can select a group. But for example, we can set one up for this student, this test student. We'll say that they get an extra hour, so theirs is due at 2:25. They get to start at 1:25, and they'll have an hour on the timer. And just in case they have late work, we'll accept late submissions until 3:25. Now that I've configured my settings, I'll click Add Exception. Excuse me, gotta update that real quick. There we go. I'll add the exception. So now I can see my exception down here with the start date, the due date, the late acceptance date if I've enabled that, as well as the timer. Once I've done that, I can go on to my grading and feedback screen. Here I can decide which attempt, if there's multiple attempts, will be recorded. You can decide if you want anonymous grading, which it'll display random numbers instead of names. This is used in more of a specific use case and usually left off. If you'd like your grades to be sent to your course's gradebook, you can enable this setting. Then you can decide what sort of feedback the student should be able to have. So they can get question level feedback, feedback specific to a question. So this would be if you filled out feedback in the test itself. So if you have a short answer question with specific information and you add feedback to that question, enabling this would display it. Next, you can decide when students would receive any feedback. You can leave it set to never, which is the default, as soon as they submit a question. So this would be during the assessment. Once the assessment is submitted, so after they've submitted the results, they'll automatically get that feedback once it's submitted. Or you can set it at a later date and time after you've finished grading. If you select any of these 3 options, you'll be able to select what the students will see. So you can set it to only release their assessment score, so it's not going to show any questions, it just shows what they scored on the assessment. Or you can select from this list here of the student response of what they answered, the correct answer, any feedback that's set up per question, any feedback that's set up for the section if you have multiple sections on an online test, any comments that you've configured, the student's question and part scores. So that would be what they scored on each individual question, and if you have multiple parts, what they scored in that part. The assessment scores, which would be their final score on the exam. And then statistics and histograms, that just shows some additional data on how they did in various sections. The most common ones that are selected are student response. If you want to release a correct response, that's selected, and students' question and part scores. So these three are the ones that are typically selected. A lot of the times, teachers will leave the correct response off just so students can't share answers. And then our last tab is layout, where you can select how students can navigate through the assessments, how many questions will be displayed per page, and how questions are numbered. Then finally, you can get to the publishing area, where this is where you'd post the exam. It would go from a draft to a published copy, and the published copy will go live based on your availability settings. If we can clarify any points or provide additional information on anything with online testing, please let us know. Thank you.